Dear listener, I think you will love the brand new merchandise that has arrived at the Politicrat Daily Podcast online store. It's the official The Politicrat Daily Podcast show shirts. That's right. There are official show shirts that have now been released and are available for you to buy right now. You'll love the design on the front. You just have to see it. And I can't really describe it to you. So the best way to take a look at it is to see it and to buy it right now at the-politicrat.myshopify.com. That's the-politicrat.myshopify.com. Thank you. Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Thursday, March the 18th, 2021. On this edition of the Politicrat, a conversation with Natalie Collins. Natalie Collins is someone who specializes in educating and addressing male violence against women. We will be talking about ending male violence and how to end male violence against women and dealing with the root causes of it, and so much more in our conversation coming up next. With me today on this edition of the Politicrat Daily Podcast is a very special guest. I'm honored and really it's a great pleasure to be able to speak with her. Her name is Natalie Collins, and she is in Sunderland in England. And I will tell you that it is best left to Natalie to introduce herself and tell you all about what she does. Go ahead, Natalie, please, and welcome to this edition of the Politicrat.
Thank you. I describe myself as a gender justice specialist, which most people are like, what even is that? And that's okay, because I basically made the title up. I've been working on issues of male violence since about 2010. And so I've worked on issues around domestic abuse, sexual violence, child sexual exploitation, female genital mutilation. Basically, like, nobody asks me what I do at a party or you'll be like, sad. Because I just talk about really depressing subjects all the time. And so I am the interim CEO of an organization called the Women's Liberation Collective, which is a charity, and we run a course called the Own My Life course. And what we do is we train practitioners who work with women in local services around domestic and sexual violence, and we train them to deliver this course with women around the UK and sometimes outside the UK. So we trained a woman in Mexico who was so committed that she got up at 2:00 in the morning to be able to make it in our time frame, which was amazing. And I also have written a book called the I can't remember what my book's called. I was just like, here it is. Here's what I made earlier. It's called Out of Control, Couples, Conflict and the Capacity for Change. And it's about how to understand domestically abusive behavior. It's written for the kind of the helpers, so friends, family, others, to enable them to understand what is abuse. What could this be going on for my friend or my family member, or, you know, if you're a helper in some other role, and how can I make sense of that and support them better? So yeah, I do lots of different things, which is why it's often better for me to do it, because otherwise people are like, what is it you do again? Because it's so many different things.
Well, Natalie, it's really wonderful to have you here, and thank you for your time. And I appreciate that you told us all of the things that you do, and thank you for that. One of the things I wanted to start with before we get to some of the events of the day that have happened over the last few days and the last week or two is to ask you about your work. Now, you've talked about what you do, but what are the things you find in your work when you're dealing with gender violence, you're dealing with toxic masculinity, the organization and the clients who come to you and speak to you? What are the things that you most often hear from them, and what kinds of things do you suggest to them, without giving obviously the personal things away if there's anything that's in confidence? But what kinds of things do you typically find yourself and your organization hearing from women about male violence or about what happens to them?
Yeah, so that, I mean, the types of abusive behavior that are perpetrated are essentially, sometimes it feels like all abusers went to the same school, you know, like they all got taught how to harm women, because essentially the behaviors, while kind of, if you are unaware of them, might think that sounds really extreme, and is that really true, actually is so prevalent within the lives of women who are being abused by men and by perpetrators, that it would seem like there's some sort of school teaching them how to do this, but actually it's because there's only a finite number of ways you can control another person, and so it ends up sounding quite, sometimes people disclose things that if you're not in the sector you might think this sounds really far-fetched, and actually it really isn't. You know, I've had women who have been told by a partner that someone's going to kill them, and they genuinely believe that someone is going to kill them. They'll be driving in the car and their partner will go, get down, they're going to kill you if you don't hide. And so you know, there's lots of ways that an abuser might lead their partner to be fearful of the outside, and they will portray themselves as, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to keep you safe from these bad people out there, which is why a lot of the kind of messages around stranger danger and about stranger attacks can actually perpetuate male violence, in terms of that it leads women, you know, abusers will say, you need to be in the home with me, I'll look after you, you can't go out, I need to take you everywhere, I need to time how long you're going to be, and it's just because I care. And actually what it is doing is highly controlling her. So there's stuff around making the outside unsafe. There's one of the crucial tactics that an abuser has is to isolate their partner from friends and family. So that might be simply by saying, well, you're not seeing your mother anymore, and quite kind of domineering, or it might be by saying, how well do you know Natalie? And you say, yeah, I know really well, why? And then he says, oh, no reason, I just wondered. And we're left thinking, like, what does he know? What does he know that I don't know? And so there's this sense of either gradually undermining our trust in family and friends, or explicitly demanding we have no contact. They might try to like make sexual advances towards our friends or family, which again, you know, in our kind of patriarchal society, usually we blame the woman. we're not like, here's 20 quid, you have him. no, we're like hating on the woman. I was speaking to a young woman who had a baby with her partner, and she said, oh, my boyfriend cheated on my boyfriend cheated on me with my best mate. I can't believe that she would do that to me. And I said, oh, that's really interesting, like, why are you more concerned about what your best friend's done than your boyfriend? And she was like, well, he's a player, that's what he's going to do, but she's my best friend. And so I think there's whole kinds of cultural context around what we expect of men versus women and that kind of stuff. So stuff around isolating us from others. It might be about exhausting us. Now, exhaustion is a huge tactic of abusers, yet often we don't really talk about it. So we know, anybody who's had a small child or a demanding job will know that exhaustion is a torture tactic. You know, that sleep deprivation. And what an abuser will often do is start an argument just before bed, or wake us up in the night to talk about their feelings. And so we're like up all night thinking, like, not able to sleep, and then we're expected to kind of be fully functional the next day. This is particularly dangerous if an abuser has a night shift job, because they'll often expect us to be answering their calls or being on the call to them all the night and that kind of thing. It might be just that they wear us down by going on and on and on until we're just spread too thin. Often if we've got children, they won't do their fair share of the childcare and the housework, and so we're then exhausted because we're doing all this stuff. Somebody might keep us pregnant, so reproductive coercion is a significant part of abusive behavior, and that's things like pricking holes in condoms, manipulating somebody from a long-term contraception, like the implant, for something like the contraceptive pill, which he'll then flush down the toilet or hide from her, or or manipulate her to stop taking, because we have this kind of cultural myth that men are trapped by women getting themselves pregnant. Like, when we're not in a situation where there's a whole load of immaculate conceptions going on, right? Like, no woman gets herself pregnant, really. Right. But actually, what we're seeing is that, do you know who gets trapped by pregnancy? The person who grows another human being in their body. They're the person who gets trapped. And so there is this real issue with men coercing, manipulating, or forcing women into pregnancy. And who can talk about that? You can't talk about the fact that, you know, I had this child because it was something that I didn't have a choice over, because, you know, I mean, the courage of women who raise children that they have been subjected to coercion to you know, kind of produce is really difficult. And I know a number of women that have been repeatedly impregnated over and over again, and actually that is hugely controlling, because they can't flipping leave the house without somebody to help them. So there's all these different things: sexual abuse, humiliation, gaslighting is a big one, which is about making somebody feel like they're going mad, making them feel it's all their fault, and all of that is about the abuser avoiding responsibility for their behavior. And so there's lots and lots of different ways. It can be technologically based, so controlling somebody's access to technology. It can be about finances, you know, like that. Basically, there are lots and lots of different ways of doing this, but the purpose of it is to control somebody and basically for the abuser to get whatever they want.
Right, absolutely. And one of the things that you talk about with the isolation, I would also imagine too that family members, because of the patriarchy and because of the misogyny in the society ingrained over centuries and part of the institutional culture, that you have family members isolating those women as well in some instances because of generational situations, and they maybe distrust and they assume that the woman did something to deserve this. You know, you pointed this out, Natalie, when you talked about, you know, these kinds of excuses that get made about blaming the woman. One of the people that you cited said, oh, well, he's a player. You know, I liken this to what people said over here in the United States, and say anywhere, but particularly when the Mike Tyson situation happened with the rape of Desiree Washington, and that young Black woman was raped. There were people in all kinds of communities, including some people in the Black community, who were saying things like, well, what was she doing going up to his hotel room at 3 a.m. in the morning? She knew what she was getting into. And it's the same thing that you're talking about, this blaming of a woman. Well, what do you expect? The man is a predator, you know, which speaks really not only to the culture, but that also is a telling statement about those men who do these things. That we're not focusing on the malevolence of the behavior that they're perpetuating and doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea that that male violence is inevitable and we all have to operate around it is a really anti-man attitude. Like, if you think that men are not going to be able to help themselves but rape, you really need to rethink your ideas about men, because that's a horrible thing to think about men, right? Like, if we're going to talk about what's anti-man, it's anti-man to think that men can't keep hands to themselves, that men can't control their sexual organs. This is a ridiculously offensive thing to think about men, right? But actually, a lot of the messages which blame women assume that men can't help themselves, and like, if men cannot be in control of their sexual urges, they really shouldn't be in charge of anything. Just like, we shouldn't have men in charge of anything if that's the case. But the reality is, I actually think that men can make good choices, and that, like, actually that men can be good people, because this is about choice. And there's a really great article by a couple of academics called Nicole Westmoreland and Liz Kelly, and they talk about, like, kind of domestic abuse perpetrators, and they look at domestic abuse perpetrator programs, and they say, you know, can a leopard change his spots in terms of perpetrators? And what they say is, actually, a perpetrator isn't a leopard, because they're not naturally abusive. They're making choices to be abusive. So no, leopards can't change their spots, but abusers can change their abusive behavior because it's not natural or innate within them. And so I think that one of the challenges we're dealing with is this fixed nature of male violence, which means that women are expected to just operate around that. And then the other thing we're dealing with is the blaming of women. And one of the reasons for blaming women is actually not necessarily rooted in misogyny and patriarchy. What's really important to understand about victim blaming is it's actually about psychological safety on behalf of the person doing the blaming. So if that woman went to Mike Tyson's hotel room and it wasn't her fault, and there's no choices she could have made that would have stopped him being abusive, and if actually that's all on him, then she didn't have any way to stop it. And if she couldn't stop it, what about me? Would I be able to stop it? What about my daughter? What about all the people that I care about? Would they be able to? Can I make sure that they're not raped? No, I can't. And actually, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to live in a world where we cannot guarantee that ourselves or those we care about are not going to be sexually violated. And so it's much easier to live in a world where we blame those who are, because that means that we're safe because we can make the right choices, and they're unsafe because they made the wrong choices. Whereas if there is no right choices that protect us from sexual violation, protect us from male violence, then actually it's really scary to live in this world. And we don't want to live in a world where that's the case. So psychological safety is hugely a part of this. This isn't about people. Yes, there are people who are really unkind and really misogynistic who are blaming women out of really, terrible intentions. But actually, for a lot of people, they're invested in a world where women are at fault for the harm that they're subjected to, because that means that I can make sure me and mine are safe. And so understanding that is really crucial. Absolutely, on top of that, there's a whole lot of misogyny and patriarchy, which says actually women are responsible for men's sexual urges. And really, if you don't want to be treated badly, then don't dress like that, don't look like that, don't go there. But the reality is, we know that sexual violence, that men perpetrate sexual violence against women no matter what they're wearing. There is no country in the world where there is not sexual violence from men towards women, because this is not about what she was wearing, it's about what he thought he had the right to. And so what we need to deal with, if we want to change things, is we have to deal with the messages that are sent to men that they have a right to sexual access to women's bodies.
And I really appreciate that you've said that, because it's so important. It bears repeating. And I've spoken about this on a number of occasions on this podcast, as listeners and the viewers know. But it's really important to hear this over and over again. And we have to educate men and boys. That's where we have to be, I think. We are always told, protect women, protect women, protect women. And there's no emphasis on, educate boys from 4, 5, 6 years old, educate men, unlearn this behavior, unlearn these mechanisms and strictures that institutions and men put into place. And that needs to be the emphasis. Yes, protect women. Of course, we want to protect everybody from violence. But the first step, in my view, Natalie, is we've got to start teaching boys and men, boys from the earliest ages, when they're able to tie their shoes, whenever that age is, we've got to start teaching those little lads to respect women, to respect girls, to redefine the notion of what being a boy and a man is. And that's where I think the growth really comes. Instead of throwing police at this, we're going to get to this in a few moments, throwing all these masculine figures of force and toxicity to protect women. I mean, that's how I read it in my brain and my mind, Natalie, when I hear that word, protect women. But I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that before we start to talk about some of the issues that are going on right now.
Yeah, I think the work around positive masculinities and enabling boys to flourish, because the reality is nobody wins under patriarchy. Like, actually, men are not having hugely flourishing lives. The suicide rates for men are atrocious. The mental health issues for men are atrocious, because from very young, men are told the only acceptable emotions are anger and humor. Like, that does not allow for a liberatory experience of you being a human being. Like, actually, up until about 11, boys and girls cry the same amount, but then as men, like, this idea that you cry, like, it's not acceptable to cry, it's not acceptable to be weak, and what is not acceptable to be is to be feminine, which actually homophobia is so often rooted in misogyny, because it's rooted in the hatred of the feminine. And so what we need to do is the worst thing a man can be is a woman, but also he's supposed to have all his intimate relationships with women, so like he's being set up for failure, right? Like, how is he supposed to have a successful heterosexual relationship if he is heterosexual, when he can't actually like women? Because if he's like one of them, then there's something wrong with him. So I think from very young. I mean, it starts from the minute, from before a baby even exists. It starts, they did research about where they asked adults, when you have a child, what do you think that child will be like? And if it's a girl, what do you think that girl will be like? And what do you think that boy would be like? And before these children even existed, were even thought of, the sorts of things that adults would say were really stereotyped about. Their boy was going to like sport, and he was going to be really funny, and he was going to be really adventurous, and their girls were going to be really pretty, and they were going to be kind of passive. I mean, I don't think they'd use the word passive, but like they were going to be kind and caring, and and so actually before, hypothetical children, before they're even like conceived, are already being kind of constrained within particular ideas about what a boy and a girl is. And when we know the sex of that fetus in utero, then actually there is proof that our tone of voice will change, the language we use will change, and when that baby's born, the clothes we put them in will change, and then the tone of voice we use, there's proof that if you have a boy baby, you'll hold it out, bouncing it on your knee. If you've got a girl baby, you'll hold it and look at it in her face and go, oh, aren't you lovely? So this starts before they tie their shoes. This starts before they're even conceived. This starts with us as adults making decisions that we are in a system which says that boys are one way and girls are another, and we all are invested in that. When my kids were tiny, they're now nearly 18 and nearly 16, and when they were tiny, I used to change the names of their stories. So if it was an adventurous boy, I'd call it a girl's name, and if it was a kind of really kind girl, I'd make it a boy's name. So this isn't just about kind of giving kids like lectures, boys, you must respect women. This is about giving boys access to the full rate, to women who expand the notion of what they think women and girls are, and the same with girls, giving them access to expanded notions of what men and boys are. And actually for men, it's about taking really significant responsibility for the care work in your home, for the emotional labor in your home. That doesn't just include like changing nappies, though it does include that, but who's buying the birthday cards? Who's remembering the birthdays? Do you know what I mean? Like, right. And who's doing all of those kind of things? Who's making sure the kids' shoes are ready for the morning? Actually, there's so much of this stuff falls to women, and it's about men saying, I want to be an active participant in this. And even if it's not men with their own children, it's actually thinking about which kids do I have access to? How can I challenge these ideas? And so I think it starts really young, and then it does become more explicit as they get older around healthy kind of relationship models and challenging toxic notions of masculinity wherever we see it, and femininity, but it's a lifelong process that starts before conception.
It's just so good to have you on to talk about this and really expand the parameters and broaden them so that the thinking gets deeper and more incisive, which it must. And I talk about language a lot, and how we think and how we speak, and what we say and do, reflections of what is in the self. And it's really great to have you on, and you're expanding that language. It's so important. So again, I want to thank you for that. And there's one or two things I actually want to say, or ask you about at least. And I'd like to get your thoughts and feelings about this. Social media, it's controlled largely by men. Instagram, Twitter. And the devil's advocate argument, because I don't believe this personally, but the devil's advocate argument is, well, I go on Instagram and I see these photos of women that they're not wearing anything. It's just, And someone will say, well, they've got agency and they've got the right to do that, and da-da-da-da-da-da. But the devil's advocate argument is, well, look at this. What is this? How do you respond to an argument like that, having the provisional stipulation that men are controlling these social media platforms, and there are things on them that are really toxic? What would you say about the person who says, well, there's women who are next to naked on a platform like Instagram? Any thoughts about any of that? I mean, it's probably a little bit away from the important things that we're talking about, but this is also an issue that has importance to it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we talk about the the context in which men and women participate in their sexuality. So, and what is normative, what is acceptable, what is encouraged. So let's not talk necessarily firstly with adult women. So let's talk about girls who are entering social media at like 8, 9, 10. I know they're not supposed to be there till they're 13, but let's be honest, most teenage girls and boys and tweenage girls and boys are kind of have access to social media accounts when they're like 9, 10, 11, right? So what they've done is they've grown up in a society which has shown them particular models of what is to be aspired to as a man or as a woman. So the women are generally sexualized, they're generally objectified. So every advert they've ever seen of a woman, so it shows a woman looking like this. Looking like an object, like an ornament, and is of a certain size, generally going to be white, and if they're black, they're going to be kind of very European and quite light skinned, and they're going to be very skinny, and they're going to be sexualized, and they're going to be objectified. And the men are going to be the subjects. In any image where you have a man and a woman, you generally have a subject in the man who has the power and is a powerful pose, and you have the woman who's the object, who's kind of like bearing a jugular, ready to, like, you know, like you would if you're an animal bearing it for getting eaten by a lion or something. I don't know. But anyway, so you've got these kind of two different messages that kids growing up are seeing. This is what photographs of women look like. This is what photographs of men look like. And then, you know, they are likely to be kind of exposed to pornography or pornographic type content. You know, we're seeing kind of by tween age, I would be expecting most kids by the time they're 12, they will have seen some online pornography. So they then have this exposure to very, very hypersexualized, very aggressive sexual violence coded as this is what sexuality is. So these are the messages that they get, and so when they put their first picture onto Instagram, and it's them smiling, looking into the camera with their regular clothes on, looking like a 12-year-old girl. Nobody likes it. Then they put like another picture on where they're like pouting and they're looking really hypersexualized, and they've got like maybe like a low cut top on. 17 likes, 18 likes, 19 likes. Everyone's saying how brilliant they look, how amazing they look. And so they're learning really quickly, like, this is what I need to look like. The boys, they put a picture of themselves like just looking like, you know, when they're but then it'll be less likely for boys. But if they put pictures of themselves when they've started going to the gym and they've started using protein shakes and they're getting a bit of a six pack, loads more likes. So, you know, we have actually an eating disorder that's developed in the last few years called bigorexia that men and boys get, which is where they think they're skinnier than they really are. And so they work out in the gym more and more because they think they're really skinny and that they need to work out. Like, so that didn't exist until every picture we saw of a man was of a six-packed man. You know, like I'm 36. So, you know, 20 years ago, you didn't see, most men did not have six packs. Like in the media, you wouldn't see loads of men with six packs. Whereas now, that's the norm for the male body. And so when we talk about what women or men post on social media, we can't kind of say, oh, that's what women are posting, therefore they should expect that men are going to do this. Actually, they spent their whole life being told that that's the role that they should aspire to. Like, why are you surprised when they live up to it? And why are you blaming them for living up to it? They're living up to a societal message that that's all they've been given. And I think, you know, there's loads of conversations we can have about what would female sexuality look like if it wasn't conditioned in a patriarchal society? And I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure the clitoris would be very involved. Right? You know, like, women have an organ purely for sexual pleasure. Men didn't get one of those. No, just women. And then we talk about men having much more kind of interest in sexuality than women. That's interesting, isn't it? You don't get an organ purely for sexual pleasure. But I think, so when I do work in schools and I talk about hypersexualization and pornification of culture, the girls will say to me, like, but the thing is, I should be able to wear what I want. And I'm like, yeah, you should. And you should be able to wear what you want, and you shouldn't get objectified, and you shouldn't be sexually assaulted. Absolutely, you should be able to wear what you want. But why is what you want to wear what a man will tell you you look sexy in? You know, like, women aren't like, I want to wear my jogging bottoms outside the house.
Right.
Like that's not that. It's not like I want to wear baggy jumpers. That's it. You know, like actually, when I talk to women, like I do an exercise with women where we talk about what is our favorite clothing, and
Right.
women's favorite clothing is inevitably what they're comfortable in, but would they never leave the house in it? So it's like really interesting that for women, our bodies and what we wear, like which men often don't understand, that when you're a man, you wear clothes because they're comfy and they kind of functional, right? Women, when we leave the house, we're conditioned that we should look like an ornament, and so we wear clothes in order to kind of interact with the male gaze. And so like it's really interesting in lockdown, all the, like lots of women will say, I wear this because it makes me feel good, and it's like, have you worn that in lockdown? No, you haven't, because you're not leaving the house. And like, you know, I shave my legs because it makes me feel good, and then actually when you like, have you shaved your legs since nobody's looking at them? Oh no, you haven't. Oh, interesting. Like, so I think there's a whole load of stuff that we as women do have to have these conversations about, while at the same time not doing it in a way that colludes with or kind of interacts with that narrative that means that it's women's fault if they wear these clothes, that men treat them like that. Women are wearing those clothes because we've been told that's the only way that we have value, and until we create a society which says actually being valuable isn't in that, we're not going to see much change, really.
Yeah. I mean, that's the God's honest truth. Nothing that you've said isn't. I mean, what you said about what women wear. Oh my goodness me! I've seen so many conversations online, and had some conversations with women offline, people I know, about this very thing that you're talking about. I wanted to, because it's so important. I mean, this is very important. I wanted next, Natalie, to bring us toward a discussion, a conversation about what has been going on here lately. First, here in the United States, as you may have learned over the last 24 hours, a 21-year-old white man was arrested in the killings of 8 people who were Asian, 6 of them Asian women. So there's an issue there of gender violence as well. And of course, there's an issue of race going on in there, obviously, as well. And the news about that now is that this particular 21-year-old is saying, well, I had an obsession with massage parlors. So there's this attempt to disaggregate race and gender, and one begets the other as well. Quite frankly, there's a lot of issues there that we can explore certainly in another time, but they're definitely there together, and one and the other. But there can be both. It's obviously anti-Asian violence, and it's obviously, if it's indeed true, because these are massage parlors, he had an addiction. None of this is an excuse. It's reflective of, again, the culture and what you've been talking about, and that he feels the need to actually kill women, addiction or not. It doesn't. I mean, that's his justification, at least from the news reports I'm getting at. Can we talk about that before getting to what I wanted to talk about as well, please?
Yeah, I think we need to name him as a Christian terrorist for a start. You know, this was
Right.
a guy who was a Baptist member, like baptized member of the Southern Baptist Convention. You know, this is a guy who is part of a very committed Christian. You know, his father's a pastor. You know, and so we can't take religion out of this. I should say, you know, like hashtag not all Christians, right? But you know, I do lots of work within a Christian community, and I'm coming from a Christian perspective myself. So like I spend a lot of time challenging a lot of the kind of narratives of purity culture and sexual kind of weird sexual ideas that Christians have, and there's a whole load of them. So I think, you know, like we've got to recognize that within kind of the religious context that he's in, male entitlement over female bodies is the norm. Like that men should be in charge of everything but their sexual urges. That's a kind of like theologically ordained idea. So I think, you know, that this is all part and parcel, as well as the fact that he chose to kill Asian women primarily. And I think, you know, that this is about race, this is about sex, this is about misogyny, this is about sexual entitlement, and this is about him as somebody who's likely to have been a punter, who's likely to have used women for sexual purposes. And actually, that's one of the challenges that the sex industry contributes to, actually. You know, I know there's lots of people who will say this is about listening to sex workers and about kind of that this is about making the sex industry safer for women. But I think while it's really important that we do listen to women in the sex industry and listen to what they what they're talking about and how they feel safer, we also need to recognize that this industry, while it is possible to buy sexual access to a woman's body, for a man to do that, then actually we're going to have problems with men thinking it's okay to kill those women because they own them, because they belong to them, because they bought access to them. You cannot buy sexual access to another person without dehumanizing them. Like, what do you mean? You want to have sex with someone that you've bought sexual access to, that you've paid for? That's not consent. She's not doing it because she wants to. She's doing it because you paid her to do it, right? And so I know that that's controversial, and there'll be people who think I'm a terrible person and that I should just be kind of pro the sex industry in a kind of safe way. But actually, I think I would be abolitionist in terms of the sex industry. We cannot, while you can buy sexual access to a female body, we cannot see the end of sexism and misogyny. It's just not going to happen. And so I think, we need to have a conversation about the dangerous nature of an industry which says you can have access to women's bodies, you can pay for access to these bodies. So I think absolutely there's so many conversations that could be had. And I think, for the women who've been killed, for their families, for their friends, this is horrific. And for all Asian people, and Asian women particularly, who are going to be terrified and horrified by this, it's really important that we do recognize that this is a racialized and misogynistic attack, and is going to have an impact on all Asian American women, and also recognize the stuff around kind of the COVID stuff and the racism that's linked to that around all of this stuff. So it's a really, really complex picture, and I think essentially we need to be having a conversation. And it's very easy for this to be a conversation about race or a conversation about sex and misogyny. It's a conversation about both, and we need to be able to have nuanced conversations about both of those things, I think.
And I'm glad you said that, Natalie, because I feel the way you do about this. And not only that, because again, it's broadening the horizons of the conversation and the language that we think and speak in. And I also think, the same applies to Breonna Taylor, who the horrific 1 year mark of her killing, her assassination, her execution by police as she slept in her bed. I mean, in any situation, it's horrible. But the fact that a woman can be in her own bedroom and is sleeping and have her life ended in so brutally violent a way, and then the institutions behind that allow that person or those three police officers, those three white police officers, to just walk away from it and only charge one of them with shooting into the wall of the apartment next door to Breonna Taylor's. That's a whole nother thing. And yes, I mean, I'm glad you said that we have to talk about both of those things, because that is obviously about racism, and it's about the violence against women as well. And those two things are certainly things we should be talking about. And I appreciate that you've given some time to it here. Now, the next part of this conversation, the final part of the conversation, is to talk about Sarah Everard. For those, I've talked about her here, but for those who may not know, Sarah Everard, on March the 3rd of this year, 2021, was walking through South London in Clapham Common, around that area, coming home from a friend's house, and she never made it home. And that's what happened. And we know why she never made it home. She was killed brutally. And there is someone who is in custody for that killing. Is a police officer, Metropolitan Police Officer, Wayne Couzens, father of two, married father of two, I believe, as well. And his trial is not till October the 25th, and he'll appear via video again on July 9th. This is in England. A lot has gone on. We've seen what police have done over the past weekend as well, in terms of how they've behaved towards women who are just going to observe and pay respects to a 33-year-old who had a future ahead of her. No matter what she had ahead of her, she should never have had her life taken so brutally. She should still be with us. And so I guess I want to offer that preface as to talk about her, and also to talk about the way we as a society in the UK, in England particularly, and the media have responded to the reaction to her, to the killing, to the Metropolitan Police, to Cressida Dick, the only woman, the only female commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in its almost 200-year existence. and the language that politicians are speaking. I know that's a lot of different things. But Natalie, whatever you want to say, obviously, the floor is yours to talk about this, because this is something that I feel so passionately about. No woman, no matter what her racial background, no matter who she is, nobody should have their lives taken at all. And especially just walking home and minding your business, and your life is ended by someone, a male figure, and then a police officer on top of that, as I talked about Breonna Taylor. So can you talk, please, about any or all of those things, your reactions and your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just say we have to be really careful, because in the UK, the laws around declaring somebody's guilt before court is really, really, we've got to be really careful. So a police officer has been arrested and charged, but because that case is not yet in court, I think we have to be careful about saying this was a police officer who definitely did this, because he hasn't been found guilty yet. But I think the more broader conversations that we can have around Sarah Everard's death and disappearance, and what has emerged in the UK really has been an outpouring of distress and horror, and stories from women about the many different ways that they modify their behaviour in order to be safe in a society where there are so many threats. And about 12% of murders of women by men in the UK are committed by strangers. So there's this idea that, you know, we kind of are having from the police and from the government saying this is a really rare thing. It's not actually as rare. 12% is not that rare. And actually it's about this continuum that actually, yes, murder, like it's about every 5 to 6 weeks a woman's killed by a stranger, a man who's a stranger to her. But actually every day women are modifying their behavior around men who are behaving in sexually predatory or sexually harassing ways. And you know, a lot of the time women might be asking, actually, if I hadn't have done that, could I have been another victim? And so women are constantly modifying their behavior, and when they do, they're told they're paranoid, and if they don't, they're told it's their fault. So women can't win. And I think I was reading a blog by a feminist linguist called Deborah Cameron, and in her blog she talks about the fact we spend all this time talking about women's safety, and we should be talking about women's freedom, because women's safety is all about the framing of that conversation is about all the things that women should be limited in order to keep them safe. Actually, women should be free. Like, you know, yes, like we should be safe, but more than that, we should be free. Like, safety is too low a bar, right? Like should be looking for something much, much more significant than just safety. And I think, you know, we can't separate race in this conversation. So Sarah Everard was a white woman and a middle-class white woman as well. So I think we have to take into account that perhaps some of the reasons why her disappearance and her death was taken as seriously as it was and was kind of investigated and has led to the level of outcry it has is because she was a white woman. Last year, 2 women in the UK, they were killed, sisters, Nicole Smallman and Beba Henry, and the police officers in that case were proven to have taken humorous selfies with the bodies of these women, and those 2 police officers are still currently working in the force and haven't been sacked, never mind prosecuted. And so I think, you know, like it's really important that we don't ignore the fact that this is much more complicated, and that's not to in any way diminish or say that it's not significant or important that the outcry and the uproar and the vigil and the protesting around Sarah Everard's death is not any less legitimate. But we need to be asking questions about what does that mean for my Black and minoritized women sisters, you know, what is going on for them in all of this. And so I think, you know, that's also a crucial question to ask. And actually, we know that Black girls are sexualized much earlier than white girls in this country and in lots of places in terms of the attitudes that are kind of the perceptions and the prejudices and the discrimination. So I think there's lots and lots that we need to be acknowledging in this, that why is this case the one that leads to serious concern and serious asking those questions and serious outpourings of grief, and which people are we missing or are we not hearing from, which voices and which stories are we not taking seriously as well. So I think that's really important. But I think, you know, what has emerged has been this really kind of politicized response. I mean, we've just had a a law passed in this country that kind of says that any protests which have the potential to cause annoyance can be stopped by the police. And it's like, the point of protest is to cause annoyance. Like, it's not a good protest unless somebody is annoyed by it. And so I think we're seeing real kind of issues around that. A maximum sentence around the destruction of statues of 10 years in prison. The minimum sentence for rape in this country is 5 years. So like, there's women in the UK saying, I think I might pretend to be a statue, like I might get more protection. And a lot of this comes out of there's been a kind of big out of the Black Lives Matters movement in the UK, because we have a lot of I think you do in the US too, but we have a lot of statues of colonial men, generally men. I'm sure there were colonial women. We don't get many women statues, but I'm sure they would if they could. Of like, and so there's a lot of kind of protest around the statues and which stories are told and who is honoured in our history. And so there's kind of this like, kind of the culture wars type stuff that is wanting to kind of like condemn the statue haters, but doesn't really care about the woman haters quite so much. And so I think, what we really need to see in terms of action, and it's really boring, like it's not a new law. We don't need a new law. What we need is really well-funded women's services, really well-funded rape crisis services, refuges for women to go to. We need, and those services usually are the best place to do the education in schools, the best place to inform locally on how this should be responded to. And so I think there is this sense that we want, people want a new, like a flash in the pan, they want a new thing that's going to fix it. This isn't going to be fixed by a new thing. It's going to be fixed by really tedious, hard work and people being willing to look at their own actions and their own behaviours. But a lot of it is going to be by investing appropriate funding. They're talking about, kind of having more street lights. They're even talking about having undercover police officers in nightclubs, which is like the worst idea ever.
Right. What could possibly go wrong?
That's it. So like, there's all these kind of ideas that get thrown around, and the reality is there's also this desire to criminalize. So to say we should have harsher penalties and we should have more laws, we should make more things illegal. The problem is that there's already lots of things that are illegal. It is illegal to rape in the UK. Like, it's illegal. There is places where it's not illegal, but it is illegal to rape in the UK. Now, only 1.5% of reported rapes, this is not the ones that don't get reported, but of reported rapes result in a conviction. 98.5% of rapists who are reported to the police get off with raping. And that will even be in cases where there are significant injuries. So I know women who've reported to the police and they've been strangled, they've got bruising around their neck, they've got other injuries, and they're told, well, you could have consented to this. And if you don't give us your mobile phone so that we can check it for evidence, we won't prosecute. And then if we find any evidence that you ever had like a amenable conversation with this guy, that probably means you did consent. And so, and if there's any, compromising pictures or anything else on your phone, that can be used in court against you to prove that you're not really a legitimate victim. And so there are lots and lots of issues with the current laws, and the reality is, we know if you put undercover police officers in nightclubs, do you know who's going to get arrested? It's not going to be the white men. You know who's going to get kind of like, this is the issue, that we also, the idea of always kind of looking for a criminal justice solution. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have criminal justice solutions, and I'm not saying there isn't a place for kind of criminalizing behavior, because we should say certain behaviors are unacceptable and there will be very serious consequences for that. But actually, until the laws that we have are being enacted and used, and those systems are working effectively, I mean, in some ways it's interesting, because I know there's kind of a defund the police movement in the US. Like the UK police has been stripped of funding more and more. Like, so right. Actually, a lot of the failures we see in the UK is because the police don't have any money, because they're having to do more and more with less and less. So I think it's a really complex process, but I think that we can't talk about criminalization and the criminal justice system without talking about the disproportionate impact that will have on Black and minoritized men and women. But we also need to say that there need to be consequences, and there need to be systems to hold perpetrators, particularly of male violence, to account. So I think this is about systemic change, not just kind of fancy new laws or ridiculous initiatives that are not really going to achieve a whole deal.
And I'm so grateful that you mentioned the systemic aspects too, because that's so critical, as everything you've mentioned, because that's the last thing I think really is the system. How are we changing that? I know it starts bit by bit, block by block, person to person. I mean, calling for people to resign, I think, as Ed Davey did, of the Liberal Democrats, to me is not the answer to this. I know there's an election coming up on May the 6th. So perhaps there's a certain proximity to that date that Mr. Davey has kind of got in mind. But I'm not so sure that that is the issue that gets the solving of this. I think it's about calling upon a system to resign and pressuring it to, or doing the things every day we need to do to try to change the realities of the everyday person, the educational aspects, the kinds of unlearning of these behaviors, and challenging the people in the institutions who perpetuate them, and the media conversations that are had, and the way that these stories get written. I mean, I've read countless stories about male violence against women, and the way the stories are written in the press, and you're reading that online or in the newspaper every day, the certain words that get used, that also contributes to this too. So how do we change this? I mean, what would your few words about this, or your, the last few minutes we have, Natalie, how would you ask men to change their behavior? I mean, there's obvious things, but I'm sure pornography or not watching it is one of them, because I think that is, as you pointed out, is a major part of this, among other things. So what are your thoughts on the changes that men have to make, and women as a society unlearning? Because there are some women who believe that a woman is, that this is supposed to happen to a woman, as you've pointed out before.
Yeah, so I think what we need to understand fundamentally is the reason why men abuse women and children is because they hold beliefs that they own their partner and they're entitled to do what they want to her. And so what we need to do is look at where are the places that they are learning and growing those beliefs that you own a woman and you are entitled to do what you want to her. And we need to address those things. So pornography is a really good example of a place where men learn that they own women, are entitled and have the right to do what they want to them. The historical laws that we have that say that men owned women, right? Like they did. Like this is not unsurprising that some men still think they own women, because like 200 years ago they did under law. So it's like, right, not surprising. And so I think the whole kind of systems of ownership and entitlement, and everywhere where we need to kind of discover that. And so understanding ownership and entitlement, this isn't about men's anger problems. This isn't about men having mental health issues. This isn't about men's diabetes. Yes, that is a justification. It's not about narcissistic personality disorder. It's not about all of those things. This is about men learning that they own women and they're entitled to do what they want. And they do that by trial and error. Most men are not psychopathic, evil, terrible people who just want to hurt their partner. Most men start off by being abusive because they do something wrong and they don't want to take responsibility for it. And their partner says, they cheat on their wives, they cheat on their girlfriend, and their girlfriend says, I think you're cheating on me. And they turn around and they say to her, no, you're paranoid. It's not, I'm not cheating on you. You're just imagining it. And the girlfriend goes, no, am I? Is it me? And he's like, yeah, it is you. And he's like, oh, wow, well, that worked. I'll do that again. And so much of abuse is actually trial and error, that a young guy in his first relationship, he doesn't want to take responsibility for the things he's done wrong. And so basically he starts to blame her. It's your fault. You make me do it. And actually, she then thinks it's her fault, and she feels crap and thinks she can't get anyone better. And so he's like, oh, well, that worked. So one of the things about abusive behavior is it flipping works. It benefits abusers. We have this idea that abusers are these kind of tortured creatures who are, hurt people. And if we give them enough counseling, they won't be abusive. It is flipping really, it is actually really beneficial to be abusive if you're willing to sacrifice intimacy, if you're willing to sacrifice the benefits of equal mutual relationships. But actually you get whatever you want, whenever you want, sex on demand, never take responsibility for anything, someone who serves your every need. You don't ever have to kind of apologize, all of those things. So we have to recognize that it is beneficial to be abusive. And so what we have to do is create systems in which it becomes less beneficial to be abusive. And we have to create contexts which are not conducive to an abuser. So if an abuser says to his friends when he's out socially with them, he says, oh, oh, my girlfriend, she's a right nightmare. Oh, she's this, she's that. If his friends go, oh yeah, women, we all know what women are like, that's conducive. That's encouraging him that it's okay. If the only person in an abuser's life who's telling him he's wrong is his partner who he's abusing, he'll be like, oh, she's irrational. It's her. She's the mad one. I'm exactly right in what I'm doing. And until there's other people in his life who are going, no, don't talk about it like that. It's not funny. Not funny. Until men and other people in that man's life, until his parents say, when his parents go, oh, you know, when he goes on about his partner, and if the mother-in-law or the father-in-law are going, yeah, I know, you know, she's taken you away from us, you know, like all those things, that actually it's about family members, friends, colleagues, challenging those messages, those subtle messages that are encouraging, and our world will only be better for it. So I think it's that recognition that abusers abuse because they want to and because they can. We can't do very much with what they want to, but we can reduce the spaces in which they can. We can challenge the idea that it's about their damaged childhood, and we can challenge the idea that it's about kind of their brokenness, and we can reserve our empathy primarily for the person who's being abused. And so I think it's that's part of it. It's about thinking, in what ways am I contributing to the conducive context that abusers are? If somebody was abusive in my life, how would the messages I give in the way I live, and if somebody said something dismissive about their partner, or if somebody a woman came to me and said my partner's making me feel uncomfortable, how likely am I to ask more questions, to question more, to be a safe place for that person? Or how likely am I to dismiss it and go, oh no, they're a really good guy, don't be silly, they love you, I've known them forever, they're great. Do you know what I mean? So I think, and some of that is about us being willing to accept that we aren't always the best judges of character. So if somebody I know is abusive and I think they're a good guy, guess what that means? I can't stop people I know from being around abusers because I didn't know they were an abuser. So when somebody discloses to me that somebody I care about has behaved abusively to them, I have two choices. I can say, okay, I believe you, and I didn't realize they're abusive, and I have to do a whole load of work around the fact that maybe my ability to judge who's safe and who isn't as good as I thought it would be, and there might be another situation where other people I care about are abusive, and that's really unsettling for me. Or I can tell her, actually, maybe it's not really true, and maybe she's exaggerating, because I know he's a really good guy, and then I don't have to do any of the questioning of my own internal ideals and my own internal judgment capacity. So I think that, like, there's so much stuff around just in our day-to-day lives living differently, but actually this isn't, as you say, just an individual problem. This is a systemic problem, and so we need people in power who understand this stuff, who aren't like, let's get more undercover police officers in nightclubs, and are like, actually, how do we educate boys in schools? And how do we make sure that, you know, the current laws actually work, and that more than 1% of rapists are being convicted? How do we work on the systems that are failing and work to change them? And so it's you know, like, it's not a simple process, and I know it must be quite frustrating because I'm not like giving any tangible, if you do this one thing it will fix it. The reality is that the cause of abuse is quite simple. It's about ownership and entitlement. The solutions to addressing that ownership and entitlement are really complex because actually that infuses every single part of our lives. Patriarchal understandings, racist ideologies, they underpin and infuse everything, and you know, and so we have so much work to do. It's just not that simple. But I think it starts by going, how, you know, for those people who are watching or listening, how can I make the space that I inhabit safe? How can I make sure that no abuser in my presence or in my kind of community that I have access to feels like I've encouraged them? And that's the thing that we can do on an individual level, and we can campaign and we can work for systems that change. And also give your money to women's services. Donate to services that support women, rape crisis service, domestic abuse shelters. Give money to them. They need your money. They need your support as well, because they're the ones who are the experts. So if you want to know more about what to do, ask them what you can do in your community to support them.
Oh, Natalie, thank you so very much for everything. And what you've said today, I think it's going to create a lot of thinking on a lot of people and change the way they think about these things. Certainly contemplate it and hopefully act upon it. Before we say goodbye, I would love for you to please give out your social media if you feel comfortable doing so, and any websites that you would like to direct people's attentions to about these subjects and others.
Yeah, so my Twitter account is Natweetily, which is my name, Natalie, with tweet in the middle. So people can find my website, nataliecollins.info. If you Google me, I think if you Google Natalie Collins feminist, it sort of emerges. There's definitely more than one Natalie Collins, but I don't know how many feminists there are. And people can find my book on Amazon. I think there's more reviews on the UK version of Amazon. So if people want to kind of read reviews before they buy it, they'll find that I thought the reviews went across both, but no, they don't. So if you are interested in it, go to amazon.co.uk and then have a look at the reviews and then decide if you want to buy it, or just buy it because it's great, I promise. I know bias, but yeah, so that's and people can contact me via my website if they want to know more about what I do.
Superb. Natalie Collins, what an honor it has been. Thank you so very much for being here on this edition of the Politicrat Daily podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Very special thanks again to Natalie Collins for her time. I will be linking to her Twitter account that she mentioned, as well as the link to order her book, which is called Out of Control. I will also be providing links to the following web pages that you can contact either here in the United States or across the Atlantic in the United Kingdom for women's resources, women's health, Planned Parenthood, and also the domestic violence hotline here in the United States. You can also find similar types of information in the United Kingdom and in various other countries. But I'm going to, at this point, bring to your attention, should you or someone you know needs help, particularly if you are a woman in need of some help and assistance. First of all, in the United Kingdom, please consult the following website: WOMEN Women Said, SAID.org.uk. That is the Women's Aid Organization until women and children are safe, and there are lots of different resources and help you can get in the United Kingdom for that website, Women's Aid, and it's at womensaid.org.uk. I will provide a link in the liner notes of this episode. Also in the United Kingdom, another website that I think is of great value and importance. If you have internet access or someone you know has internet access, please consult the following website for the Women's Resource Center: wrc.org.uk. A lot of important information there and resources and help that you can also get in the United Kingdom. Here in the United States, there is Planned Parenthood and also women's services and other services that will be beneficial to women and to men and to people in general. PlannedParenthood.org. PlannedParenthood.org. That website will deal with a number of different things, health and wellness, and a lot of other things that I think are very important. And then finally, here in the United States, if you or someone you know are in real danger at home, please consult the hotline.org. That's the hotline.org, or call 1-800-799-7233, 1-800-799-7233, dealing with any issues of domestic violence and abuse. Please consult that website, and it also gives you options to consult that website and try to safely leave it as well. So make sure that you get someone who can help you with navigating that site or getting help for you or someone you know. Once again, that hotline is 1-800-799-7233. And the webpage again is thehotline.org. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.